and welcome to our newest episode of What's on the Horizon. I'm Lori Sharonbrock here with Chris Shooker of Digital Horizons, and today I want to talk about conference rooms. As you are know, and now everyone else is aware, I have a new conference room space, and I had you guys work on that. And I never realized going into it, like all the things that I would have to think about from a setup perspective and where the TV goes. Like what are some best practices in your opinion on setting up conference room spaces?
Well, the first thing that's really important is to determine what you're using the space for, because a conference room can mean a lot of different things. And then every space itself has its own challenges based on the size and the layout, how many people you're seating, the windows, the lighting, all of that stuff all plays in. So I'd say best practices would be to figure out what you're ultimately trying to use the space for. Because if you're just trying to present information within the room to people only in the room, the needs of the space, or your needs of the space, I should say, are drastically simplified by comparison to, say, somebody who wants to hold video conferencing and or present to both sides and disseminate information to both sides. That's a much different scenario. So I would figure out what your needs are first, and then take things from there.
And in our space, it's kind of small, and it does serve that purpose. Is there like a required level of technology needed for a simple setup, for just that people in the room, like baseline? What do you think needs to be in a room?
Well, obviously you have to have a video display of some sort, whether that's a television or a projector and a screen. A projector and a screen is going to be the kind of the best way to do things, but it does require more control over the light in the room. And that's why doing a television is much more flexible, because it is far more capable of handling ambient light, or you don't have to worry about drawing the shades and all these things to make it a dark room. The limitation with a television is you only get so big without spending a lot of money. And that's why projection makes a lot of sense, because you can do a very large image for, comparably less money than a large television. But beyond that, I would say minimum in a conference room is you need some sort of connectivity option. The buzzword now is we'll just do wireless presentations. And there are some solutions that work for that. Crestron and Barco both have good, albeit expensive, kind of what they refer to as a bring your own device, or BYOD wireless solution, where there's still a little bit of setup required, and it's not something that literally anybody can just jump into and use, because there's a little bit of a learning curve. Those types of solutions we usually recommend for an organization's internal teams only to use, because if you try to bring that into an outside user, there's going to be some rough edges that are going to result in like a poor experience. So wireless solutions do exist, but we're still a big proponent of having a wired, physical wired connection. And there's a couple ways you can do that. If it's an existing building and you don't have the luxury of having open walls or accessible floors and ceilings, you can just put an HDMI connection in the wall below the television. But like in your space that we did, where we had access to the floor, we were able to put the connection in a nice, convenient, what's referred to as a pop-up jack in the table. So when someone walks into the room, it's a very clean appearance. The stuff is hidden away. And then when you want access to the connectivity, you just press on the table, the jack pops up. The downside with doing an in-wall connection below the television is, let's say your laptop or your presenter's on the other end of your 12-foot table. Well, now you have a cable going from the wall to the table and then across the table. And, it's cheap and easy to do something like that, and it's convenient, but it's, there's a lot of, potentially hazards involved with doing that, but it's just a distraction in general. So I would say the connectivity means are the minimum. And then the last thing that a lot of people overlook is audio reinforcement. Now in your space, it's not a giant room, so it's less of an issue. But if your room was, let's say, even just 30 or 50% bigger, which, it's not a lot, but it sounds like a lot. you want to consider having some audio reinforcement. And the most common way of doing that is like an in-ceiling set of speakers
Yes.
with an amplifier. Or, I mean, you could technically do a sound bar sometimes work, but again, when you're trying to blast sound across the room from a sound bar, generally it's too loud for people up front, not loud enough for those in the back.
Yeah.
And so, like you do with recessed lights, you put speakers in the ceiling and it helps just kind of blanket the area with sound. So connectivity, audio reinforcement are probably the two most important things.
And I think that's why we chose the setup we did in our room, because too it gave us that flexibility. Like you said, if we did expand or decide that we needed some additional sound needs,
Yeah.
we could upgrade to
Right.
something a little bit different, kind of like what you have in the conference room here in the experience center, those really awesome speakers
Right.
in the ceiling and a different kind of projection system.
Yep.
So I feel like that's like the next step, right?
Sure.
If you're trying to do more video conferencing, because mine really is set up to do just in room only.
And you could do both. I mean, in your space, there's so many options now for audio video conferencing, but I guess that's why you should call us, because
exactly.
But all joking aside, there's in my head, I'm just picturing your room and how we would do it, and there's 2 to 3 different ways that it could be done, and no room has a set way. And the other thing that comes into play is there's always a budget involved.
Yes.
And the way you approach things is sometimes tied to the budget, because
yes.
there are more aesthetic ways of doing things. There's better audio video quality.
Right.
Sometimes you have the ability to use certain equipment that from a placement perspective that you couldn't use otherwise because the budget allows for it. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things involved.
Yeah. And so, moving from a space like mine that's kind of smaller and more self-contained to moving to something like, say, a city hall or a setup like you did for Forest View Middle School.
Yeah.
And those are very drastically different kind of setups. And what kind of thought process went into bigger spaces like that?
Boy, that's like almost a whole nother video.
I know.
Yeah. Generally what we see just on the boardroom front is there's an order of magnitude higher amount of requirements of the system. So if you take, let's say, the Brainerd boardroom that we did, they have 13 or 14 or 15 positions in there that they have the city council. They oftentimes have the mayor. Sometimes they have law enforcement. They have separate seats for media, and they have a big production. And so we have, audio capturing requirements. We have to take that captured audio, reinforce it in the room for people in the room.
Yeah.
We have to take that audio and then also with cameras capture the video and combine those two. Send it to remote participants. I think they're using a WebEx solution for their video conferencing. We have to also bring the remote participants' audio into the room, show their video on the There's the contrast couldn't be greater in terms of like a very basic conference room setup to something like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in between there,
and there's a different baseline of needs. I mean, like mine is like, okay, this is your basic baseline,
right?
But then when you move into something bigger, there's a whole different baseline.
The easiest way to describe it is you're catering to a client base of, let's say, 100.
Yeah.
And there's only going to be 5 or 6 people in that room at any time. Where Crow Wing County, Brainerd, Baxter, Nisswa, Pequot, Breezy, Morrison, Hubbard, Pope, all of these places we've done work with, they're catering to the tax base.
Oh yeah.
The hundreds of thousands of people that live in these counties. So the demands of their systems is very, very different. Yeah.
And I imagine that has even changed, obviously, in the last 2 years, as remote technology was once a nice to have.
Yeah.
It's again now a baseline minimum consideration when you're putting in these. And that kind of leads me into thinking about like networking now has to become part of the conversation, where it probably never did before. So I imagine you see a lot of that too in these setups, like we're going to have to upgrade all that too.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that we had someone like you in that process asking those questions, because like I'm just a regular business owner. I
Yeah,
don't,
right.
I don't live in it every day. And so I knew at the end what I wanted it to look like.
Right.
Like in my head, like this what this room is supposed to look like. And so working with you guys was really nice to be able to say, okay, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And the answer to all those questions was no, by the way. Like every time it was no. But it was really great to have that consultative process along the way.
Sure. Yeah.
And I will also say what was awesome is your connections with Sony.
Yeah.
Because you knew like, hey, there's a really great deal coming
Right.
along.
Yeah.
So I got the most like gigantic TV,
Mhm.
like it just like it's this far away from the door.
Yeah, barely. Yeah.
To put
Yeah.
in there, and then to have such professional installation. I think everybody that comes in it now is like, this is amazing.
Cool.
I know. That's what happens
Yeah.
when you do it
Yeah.
right the first time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if anybody has any questions or wonders what conference room setups should look like, I mean, there's a lot in the YouTube channel of different installations they've done,
Yep.
plus this. And then, as always, you can visit the Experience
Right.
Center to see their conference room
Right.
set up in here.
Mhm.
So thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you in the next episode.